My husband took my sister on a luxury trip and left me behind to be a caregiver. Enjoy your chores, the note said. I cried in despair until my senile grandma stood up, handed me a black card, and said, "Dry your tears, Valerie. I just froze their bank accounts. Let the games begin." Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, grab a warm cup of tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this video. Please comment M for morning, A for afternoon, or E for evening. Now, let me take you into this story. The rain was hammering against the windshield of my sedan so hard I could barely see the exit sign for Oak Creek. It was one of those Midwest storms that feels personal, like the sky is trying to match the turmoil inside your own head. I was gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, just praying I wouldn't hydroplane into a ditch. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in Cleveland for another 2 days, negotiating a contract for my husband's logistics company. But the client had canceled last minute, rescheduling for next month. Instead of staying in a lonely hotel room, I had decided to drive 5 hours through this monsoon to surprise my family. I thought about Richard. I thought about how stressed he had been lately, always complaining about his back, about the employees, about money. I thought a surprise home-cooked meal might cheer him up. I even had a little gift for my sister, Glenda, who had been staying with us for the past 3 weeks because she was going through a rough patch after yet another breakup. And of course, I was worried about Grandma Betty. My husband's grandmother lived with us, and her dementia had been getting worse. I hated leaving her with Richard and his mother, Doris, because I knew they viewed her as a burden. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The house was dark. Not just dim, but completely blacked out. My stomach dropped. It was 7 in the evening on a Tuesday. Richard should be watching TV. My mother-in-law, Doris, should be in the kitchen complaining about something. Glenda should be lounging on the sofa scrolling through her phone. I ran through the rain to the front porch, fumbling with my keys. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence hit me harder than the storm outside. It was cold. The thermostat had been turned down way too low. "Richard?" I called out. My voice echoed in the hallway. "Glenda? Doris?" Nothing. I walked into the kitchen, flipping on the light switch. The counters were spotless, which was the first sign that something was wrong. Usually, when I came home from a trip, the sink was piled high with dishes because nobody else in this house knew how to load a dishwasher. But today, it was clean. Too clean. Then I saw it. A piece of lined notebook paper sitting in the center of the kitchen island, held down by the salt shaker. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I walked over and picked it up. I recognized Richard's handwriting immediately. It was scribbled, hasty, like he couldn't wait to finish writing it and leave. "Valerie," the note read. "Glenda has been really depressed lately. She needs a break. Mom and I decided to take her to Hawaii for a week to cheer her up. We used the company card for the flights since it's technically a team-building expense. Didn't want to bother you while you were working. You're the responsible one, so we knew you wouldn't mind holding down the fort. Grandma Betty is on the sofa. We gave her her meds at noon. Enjoy the quiet. See you Sunday." I read it twice. Then a third time. Hawaii. My husband took my sister to Hawaii. Along with his mother. And they didn't tell me. They waited until I was out of town working to pay for their lifestyle, and then they left. Team building expense. That was a lie. Glenda didn't work for the company. She didn't work anywhere. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck, a mix of humiliation and rage. They left me behind. Again. I was the wife. I was the one who managed the company's books. I was the one who cooked the meals and paid the bills. But when it came time for a vacation, I was the one left behind to change adult diapers and spoon-feed Grandma Betty. "Enjoy your chores," I whispered to myself, crumpling the note in my fist. "We took your sister to Hawaii." The betrayal wasn't just about the trip. It was about the secrecy. It was about the fact that my sister, my own flesh and blood, hadn't sent me a single text. She was probably sipping a Mai Tai right now, laughing with my husband. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank down against the cabinets. The tears came hot and fast. I felt so small. So used. I had spent 15 years building this life, building Richard's company, trying to please his impossible mother, trying to help my chaotic sister. And this was my reward. An empty house and a chore list. I buried my face in my hands, letting out a sob that sounded ragged in the empty kitchen. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in my own living room. Suddenly, a hand touched my shoulder. I jumped, gasping for air, and scrambled to my feet. I spun around, expecting to see an intruder. Standing there was Grandma Betty. She was wearing her floral nightgown, her white hair loose around her shoulders. But she wasn't hunched over. She wasn't looking at me with that vacant, confused stare I had grown so used to over the last 3 years. She was standing straight. Her chin was up. And her eyes, her blue eyes were sharp, clear, and blazing with an intensity one hadn't seen in a decade. She looked at the crumpled note in my hand, then up at my tear-streaked face. "Grandma?" I stammered, wiping my eyes. I thought you were asleep. Did you need water? Do you know who I am?" She reached out and took the note from my hand. She smoothed it out on the counter, read it once, and let out a short, dry laugh. "I know exactly who you are, Valerie," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It was strong. "And I know exactly where those parasites went." My jaw dropped. "Grandma? You're talking. You're making sense." She looked me dead in the eye. "Dry your tears, granddaughter. I've been waiting for them to make a mistake this big. And by God, they just handed us the shovel to bury them." I stood there in the kitchen, paralyzed. The storm was still raging outside, but the storm inside the house had suddenly shifted direction. Grandma Betty, the woman I had been spoon-feeding applesauce to just last week, the woman who supposedly thought I was her nurse named Mildred, was looking at me with the sharpness of a hawk. "Grandma, I don't understand," I whispered. "The doctor said your cognitive decline was severe. You haven't recognized me in 2 years." "People see what they want to see, Valerie," Betty said, walking over to the refrigerator. She opened it, pushed aside a carton of milk, and reached for a hidden latch at the very back of the bottom shelf. "Richard sees a senile old woman who is just a signature on a check. Doris sees a burden. And you saw someone who needed care. You were the only one who was ever kind to me when you thought I wasn't there." She pulled out a small, metallic key taped to the underside of the shelf. "Come with me," she commanded. It wasn't a request. She led me down the hallway to the small study at the back of the house. This was supposed to be Richard's man cave, a room he kept locked because he claimed he had sensitive company documents in there. I had never had a key. Betty walked right up to the bookshelf, pulled out a thick volume on naval history, and revealed a hidden safe behind it. She used the key from the fridge. Inside, there wasn't money. There was a high-tech hard drive and a stack of legal files. "I own this house, Valerie," Betty said as she plugged the drive into Richard's desktop computer. "I own the logistics company. I own the land it sits on. Richard thinks he has power of attorney because I signed some papers 3 years ago when I got sick. What he doesn't know is that the trust one set up has a fail-safe clause. The moment I can prove I am of sound mind, his authority evaporates." "But why?" I asked, sinking into the desk chair. "Why pretend? Why let them treat you like furniture?" Because I needed to know, she said, her voice turning cold. I needed to know who loved me and who loved my money. And more importantly, I needed to know what they were doing when they thought no one was watching. She clicked a file on the computer screen named The Nest. I had hidden cameras installed in the living room and the master bedroom 4 years ago, right before I started my little performance, she said. Watch. I leaned in. The timestamp on the video was from 2 weeks ago. It was Tuesday, around noon. I was at work. The video showed my living room. Glenda was there, wearing one of my silk robes. She was laughing, holding a glass of wine. Richard walked into the frame. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just talking to her. He walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her neck. I gagged. I physically gagged. No, I whispered. No, please. That's my sister. Keep watching, Betty said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. She's such a bore, Richie, Glenda was saying on the screen. Valerie is so uptight. When are you going to leave her? You said once you got full control of the old hag's accounts, you'd kick Valerie out. Richard laughed on the screen. Patience, baby. The old hag, he gestured toward the hallway where Betty's room was, is barely hanging on. Once she kicks the bucket, the trust fund unlocks completely. I need Valerie to keep running the books until then. She's the only one who knows how to keep the IRS off our backs. Besides, she's a free maid. I hate sharing you, Glenda pouted, turning around to kiss him on the lips. My husband. Kissing my sister. In my house. While I was at work earning the money to buy the wine they were drinking. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air left my lungs. The betrayal was so absolute, so layered, that my brain couldn't process it. My sister. My baby sister who I had tutored, who I had bailed out of debt, who I had comforted through every breakup. She wasn't just staying here to heal. She was staying here to steal my life. They've been doing this for 2 years, Betty said softly. Right under your nose. Doris knows, too. She encourages it. She thinks Glenda is more fun than you. Doris knows? I choked out. Doris thinks you're too common for her son, Betty said. She wants Glenda because Glenda sucks up to her. They're a nest of vipers, Valerie. All of them. I stared at the screen, watching my husband and my sister mock me, watching them plan to throw me out the moment Betty died. The sadness I felt earlier began to evaporate. The heartbreak was still there, but it was being rapidly consumed by a fire hot enough to burn this entire house down. They took the company credit card, I said, my voice trembling, but not with tears this time. To go to Hawaii. They took my money, Betty corrected. To celebrate their treachery. She reached into the pocket of her nightgown and pulled out a sleek, black card. It wasn't a standard credit card. It was a Centurion card, the kind you only get by invitation. This, Betty said, is linked to the master account of the Betty Trust. The account that feeds the company, the house, and Richard's allowance. He thinks he controls the flow. He's about to find out he's just a faucet I can turn off. She handed me the card. I'm 85 years old, Valerie. I don't have much time for drama. But I have plenty of time for justice. Are you with me? I looked at the video one last time, at Glenda's smirk and Richard's arrogant smile. Then I looked at the black card. What do we do? I asked. We ruin them, Betty smiled. But first, we lock them out. To understand why the video of Glenda and Richard shattered me so completely, you have to understand the history. You have to understand that Glenda taking what was mine wasn't a new development. It was the theme song of our entire lives. We grew up in a small town in Ohio. I was the older sister by 7 years. From the moment Glenda was born, the dynamic was set in stone. I was the responsible one, the sturdy one, the little mother. Glenda was the princess. She was born with big blue eyes and blonde ringlets that made strangers stop in the street. I had mousy brown hair and glasses. My parents, God rest their souls, were good people in their own way, but they were blind. They fell into the trap of the golden child syndrome. Because I was capable, they ignored me. Because Glenda was delicate and sensitive, they poured everything into her. I remember my 16th birthday. I had saved up my allowance for 2 years to buy a used Honda Civic from our neighbor. I needed it to get to my part-time job at the library. On the morning of my birthday, my dad sat me down. He looked pained. "Valerie, honey," he said. "Glenda really wants to go to that cheerleading camp in Florida. It's her dream. We're a little short on cash this month. Since you're so good at saving, and you can just take the bus to work, maybe we could use your car fund for her camp? It would mean the world to her." I remember the lump in my throat. It tasted like ash. "But Dad, I worked for that money." I know, he said. "But you're strong, Val. You can handle the bus. Glenda, she's fragile. If she doesn't go, she'll be crushed. You don't want your sister to be depressed, do you?" That was the weapon they always used. Glenda's happiness was mandatory, mine was optional. I gave them the money. I took the bus. Glenda went to camp, quit after 3 days because it was too hot, and never paid me back. But the worst memory, the one that still wakes me up at night, happened when I was 22. I have always loved baking. It's my art. Flour, sugar, butter, they make sense to me in a way people never did. I had applied for a prestigious scholarship at a culinary institute in Chicago. It was a long shot, but I got it. A partial scholarship that would have changed my life. I had $5,000 in savings to cover the rest of the tuition and housing. I came home, waving the acceptance letter, bursting with pride. Glenda was on the sofa, crying. She was 15 then. "What's wrong?" I asked. "My nose," she wailed. "It's hideous. The boys at school called me a toucan. I can't go back. I'll kill myself, I swear I will." It was a bump. A tiny, barely noticeable bump on the bridge of her nose. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Valerie, she's hysterical. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. We found a surgeon who can fix it, but insurance won't cover it. It's $5,000. I froze. "No," I said. "No, Mom. That's my tuition money. I leave for Chicago in a month. How can you be so selfish?" Glenda screamed, throwing a pillow at me. "You want me to be ugly forever. You're just jealous because you're the fat sister." "Glenda, stop," Dad said weakly, but then he turned to me. "Valerie, look at her. She's suffering. You can always go to culinary school next year. You're young. You can work another year and save up again. This is your sister's mental health we're talking about." I looked at my parents. I looked at Glenda, whose tears dried up instantly the moment she sensed I might cave. "I can't believe you're asking me this," I whispered. "We're asking you to be the big sister," Mom said. "Please, Val. Do it for the family." I did it. I gave them the money. Glenda got her nose job. She looked exactly the same afterwards, but suddenly she was confident enough to start dating the captain of the football team. I never went to culinary school. Life got in the way. My parents got sick, the economy crashed, and I had to take a desk job to pay the bills. I locked my dream of a bakery away in a box, buried deep inside my heart. And now, 20 years later, I was looking at a computer screen, watching that same sister, the one whose nose I paid for, sleeping with my husband. "She's such a bore," Glenda had said in the video. "She's uptight." I wasn't uptight, Glenda. I was exhausted. I was exhausted from 40 years of holding up the sky so you could dance underneath it. I stood up from the desk in Richard's study. The memory of that lost scholarship burned in my chest, fueling the fire Betty had started. "You know," I told Betty, my voice hard. "She borrowed my favorite emerald earrings for this trip. I didn't lend them to her. She just took them from my jewelry box." Betty smirked. "Well, let's hope she enjoys wearing them while she's begging for change at the Honolulu airport." The betrayal didn't stop with Glenda. If Glenda was the thief of my childhood, Richard was the thief of my adulthood. I met Richard 10 years ago. I was working as a shift manager at a commercial bakery, not the fancy patisserie I had dreamed of, but it paid the bills. Richard came in as a customer. He was charming, dressed in suits that looked expensive from a distance but cheap up close. He told me he was the CEO of Hart Logistics, a family legacy. He talked about supply chains and global reach with such confidence that I was swept off my feet. I was 35, single, and tired of being the responsible one who went home to an empty apartment. Richard made me feel special. He told me I was smart, capable, beautiful. We married a year later. That was when the mask slipped. 2 months after the wedding, Richard sat me down at the kitchen table. He looked pale. "Val, baby, we have a problem," he said. "The company, it's not doing as well as I said. The accountant quit. The IRS is auditing us. I don't know what to do. I'm good at the big picture, but the numbers, they confuse me." He showed me the books. It was a disaster. Hart Logistics was basically 3 trucks and a mountain of debt. He hadn't paid payroll taxes in 6 months. "I need you," he said, holding my hands. "You're so organized. You managed that bakery perfectly. Can you just look at it? Just help me fix the filing system?" "Richard, I have a full-time job," I said. "I'm up for a promotion to regional manager." "But this is our legacy," he pleaded. "My grandmother started this company. If it goes under, it kills her. Do it for Betty? Please? Just quit the bakery. I'll pay you a salary once we're in the black. You can be the CFO." I looked at his desperate eyes. I thought about marriage, about partnership. I thought about for better or for worse. So, I quit my job. I sacrificed my promotion. I rolled up my sleeves and dove into the mess that was Hart Logistics. For the next 5 years, I worked 16-hour days. I taught myself corporate tax law. I renegotiated contracts with vendors who were about to sue us. I fired the lazy drivers Richard had hired because they were his drinking buddies. I streamlined the routes. I modernized the tracking software. I saved the company. I pulled it back from the brink of bankruptcy and turned it into a profitable, mid-sized operation. And what did Richard do? He bought a new BMW. He joined a country club. He started going to business lunches that lasted 3 hours. Every time I asked about my salary, the salary he promised me, he would get defensive. "Val, come on," he'd say. "Why do you need a salary? Everything I have is yours. We're married. Putting you on the payroll just increases our tax liability. Let's keep it in the company account so we can reinvest." I believed him. I was stupid, but I believed him. I thought we were building a future together. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the credit. We were at a Chamber of Commerce gala last year. Richard was receiving an award for Businessman of the Year. I sat in the audience, clapping, wearing a dress I had bought at a discount store because Richard said we needed to be frugal with personal spending. He got up on stage, beaming. "I built this company from the ground up," he told the crowd. "It takes grit. It takes vision. It takes a man who isn't afraid to make the hard calls." He didn't mention me. Not once. He didn't mention that the vision was me staying up until 4 a.m. fixing his spreadsheets. He didn't mention that the hard calls were me firing his incompetence friends. When he came back to the table, I whispered, "You didn't mention the team." He patted my hand condescendingly. "Babe, don't be like that. Investors want to see a strong leader. It's marketing. You wouldn't understand. You wouldn't understand." That phrase echoed in my head now as I sat in the study with Grandma Betty. He told me I wouldn't understand business. Yet, here I was, the only reason he wasn't in jail for tax fraud. "He's been skimming," I said to Betty, looking at the bank records on the screen. "Look at these withdrawals. Consulting fees to a shell company in Delaware. $5,000 a month. That started 2 years ago," Betty nodded. "Right around the time Glenda started visiting more often." It clicked. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was stealing the money I earned to pay for the woman who was stealing my husband. He was using my labor to fund his affair with my sister. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was the calculated precision of an auditor finding a discrepancy. "He thinks he's a genius," I said quietly. "But he forgot one thing." "What's that?" Betty asked. "He doesn't know the passwords," I said, a dark smile forming on my lips. "I set up the 2-factor authentication for the business accounts. It all goes to my phone." Betty's eyes twinkled. "Well then, Valerie. I think it's time you approved some transactions of your own." The betrayal wasn't just financial, and it wasn't just sexual. It was domestic. It was the day-to-day degradation that had become my normal. They say if you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out, but if you heat the water slowly, it boils to death. I had been boiling for years. Living with Richard meant living with his mother, Doris. When her husband died, Richard insisted she move in with us. "She's lonely, Val. It's the Christian thing to do." Doris was a woman who had mastered the art of the backhanded compliment. "Oh, Valerie," she'd say, watching me scrub the floor. "It's so good that you enjoy manual labor." I was always too delicate for that. My hands were made for piano, not bleach. Or at dinner, "This roast is interesting. A little dry, but I suppose working women don't have time to learn proper marinades. Glenda, dear, pass the salt." And then there was Glenda. My sister didn't just visit, she invaded. She would come over on a Friday just to say hi and stay until Tuesday. She treated my house like a hotel and me like the staff. I remember a specific Sunday last month. It was sweltering hot. I was out in the garden, weeding Doris's rose bushes because she claimed her arthritis was acting up. I was sweating, covered in dirt, my back aching. I looked through the patio door into the living room. The air conditioning was blasting inside. Richard was sitting in his recliner, watching football. Doris was in her armchair, knitting. And Glenda. Glenda was painting Doris's toenails. They were laughing. It looked like a perfect family tableau. The son, the mother, and the daughter-in-law? I walked inside to get a glass of water. The laughter stopped instantly. "Oh, Val," Richard said, not looking away from the TV. "While you're up, can you grab me a beer? And Mom needs more iced tea." "I've been working in the garden for 3 hours, Richard," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I'm exhausted." "Don't be crabby," Glenda chimed in, looking up with a sweet, poisonous smile. She was wearing a pair of my yoga pants, the expensive ones I bought as a treat for myself but never had time to wear. They looked better on her. We were just saying how lucky you are to have such a nice garden to play in. It's therapeutic, right? Playing? I snapped. It's work, Glenda. Unlike you, I don't think life is one big vacation. Whoa, easy tiger, Richard said, standing up. He walked over and put a hand on Glenda's shoulder, squeezing it protectively. Glenda is a guest. She's going through a hard time with that breakup. You need to be more supportive. You're always so negative lately. It's draining. She's right, Valerie, Doris added, inspecting her freshly painted toes. Glenda brings a light into this house. You're always rushing around with your spreadsheets and your cleaning. You make everyone tense. Why can't you be more like your sister? Relax a little. I stood there, holding my dirty gardening gloves, looking at the three of them. My husband, protecting my sister. My mother-in-law, preferring my sister. And my sister, wearing my clothes, stealing my place. I felt like an intruder in my own home. I felt like the ugly, boring, useful appliance they kept around because it kept the lights on, while they treated Glenda like the shiny new toy. I'm sorry, I mumbled. I actually apologized. I'm just tired. Well, go take a shower, Richard said dismissively. You smell like mulch. Glenda and I are going to pick up pizza. We'll bring you back a slice. They left together in his car. They were gone for 3 hours. To pick up pizza. When they came back, they were giggling, smelling like expensive cologne and white wine. They said the pizza place was backed up. I'd ate my cold slice of pepperoni alone at the kitchen counter while they watched a movie in the living room. Now, watching the security footage with Betty, I realized exactly where they had gone that afternoon. They hadn't gone for pizza. They had gone to the motel on Route 9. I saw the charge on the bank statement Betty pulled up. Starlight Inn, $65. I apologized to them, I whispered to Betty, shaking with fury. I was weeding their garden, and I apologized for being tired while they went to a motel. Betty slammed her hand on the desk. No more apologies, Valerie. Doris called you a servant? Fine. Let's see how she survives when the servant fires herself. Richard thinks you're negative? Let's show him what negative looks like when it's applied to his bank balance. They treated me like I was invisible, I said. That was their mistake, Betty replied. Invisibility is a superpower. You saw everything. You know everything. And now, you're going to use it. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 a.m. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. Inside the study, the atmosphere was electric. We had spent the last 4 hours going through everything. Betty wasn't just pretending to be demented, she had been acting like a spy behind enemy lines. She had notebooks filled with dates, times, and conversations she had overheard while napping. She had copies of emails Richard had left open on his laptop. She even had a list of items Doris had gifted to Glenda, my grandmother's china, my silver candlesticks, my scarves. Betty sat back in the leather chair, looking at me. She placed a thick manila folder on the desk. This is the trust agreement, she said. Clause 14, Section B, in the event of Richard Hart's proven infidelity, financial mismanagement, or elder abuse, the trustee, me, has the unilateral right to revoke all access and privileges immediately. She tapped the document with her fingernail. I can end him, Valerie. With one phone call to Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, I can strip him of his title, his salary, and his access to the company accounts. I can evict Doris. I can sue Glenda for theft. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. But I need you to be sure. Because once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. This isn't just a fight, it's a war. They will scream. They will cry. They will beg. They will send your parents to guilt trip you. They will try to destroy your reputation. She paused. Valerie, you have a good heart. Too good. I've watched you forgive them for 15 years. If you have even a sliver of doubt, if you think you might want to try marriage counseling, tell me now. I'll just cut him off financially and we can leave it at that. I looked at the folder. I thought about the marriage counseling Richard would propose. He would cry, blame stress, blame Glenda, tell me I was the only one he loved. He would gaslight me until I believed it was my fault for working too much. I thought about Glenda. She would cry about her mental health, threaten to hurt herself, tell me I was a cruel big sister kicking her when she was down. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the study. I saw a woman who looked 10 years older than she was. Tired eyes. Gray hairs coming in. A woman who had shrunk herself so small to fit into their lives that she had almost disappeared. Valerie Old is dead, I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded deep, resonant. What was that? Betty asked. I said the old Valerie is dead, I repeated, louder. The Valerie who apologizes for taking up space? She died tonight when she read that note. I don't want counseling. I don't want an apology. I don't want to work it out. I stood up and picked up the Black Centurion card. It felt heavy, cold, and powerful. I want them to hurt, I said. I want them to feel exactly what I felt standing in that empty kitchen. I want Richard to feel powerless. I want Glenda to feel homeless. I want Doris to feel irrelevant. I looked at Betty. Call Mr. Henderson. Wake him up. Let's burn it all down. Betty grinned, a wide, predatory smile that made her look 20 years younger. She picked up the phone. Mr. Henderson? It's Betty. Yes, I know what time it is. Put on a pot of coffee and get your paralegal out of bed. We're coming to your office. And Henderson? Bring the eviction notices. We're going to have a busy morning. She hung up and turned to me. Go wash your face, Valerie. Put on your best suit. The one Richard hates because he says it makes you look too masculine. We have a company to hostile takeover. I walked to the door, but stopped. I turned back to look at this incredible woman who had saved me from a lifetime of servitude. Thank you, Grandma, I said. Don't thank me yet, she winked. Wait until you see the look on Richard's face when his credit card gets declined in front of the whole resort. I looked into Betty's eyes, then at my own tired reflection in the mirror one last time. I had lived for others for too long. Today, the old Valerie died. If you also believe that we women should not bow our heads to traitors, if you want to see me take back everything that belongs to me, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. Let me know you are here, standing by my side, fueling me for this fight. Your support is my strongest weapon. Comment number 1 now, and now, watch what Betty and I do next. The office of Henderson and Associates was quiet at 5 a.m., save for the hum of the photocopier and the frantic typing of Mr. Henderson's paralegal, a sharp young man named David. Mr. Henderson himself, a man in his 60s with a bow tie and eyes that had seen every kind of family dispute imaginable, sat across from us. He looked at Betty with pure admiration. I must say, Betty, Henderson said, pouring us coffee. You played the long game. I was getting worried you'd let that grandson of yours bleed the trust dry before you snapped out of it. I needed him to hang himself, Arthur, Betty said, sipping her black coffee. And he did. He built a gallows so high he can see Hawaii from it. We got to work. The efficiency was terrifying and beautiful. First, the medical affidavit. Betty had secretly been seeing a neurologist in the next county for 3 years, a friend of Henderson's. We had a fresh evaluation dated yesterday. She had slipped out while I was on my trip and Richard was packing, confirming she was of sound mind and superior intellect. This document immediately nullified the medical power of attorney Richard held. Now for the financial kill switch, Henderson said, sliding a document toward me. Valerie, as you know, Richard is the operating CEO of Hart Logistics. However, the company is 100% owned by the Betty Hart Revocable Trust. The trust bylaws state that the trustee, Betty, can remove any officer for cause without notice. We have cause, I said, placing the USB drive with the videos and the bank records on the desk. Embezzlement. Commingling of funds. Moral turpitude. Excellent, Henderson said. He typed a command into his computer. I am officially revoking Richard's signatory authorization on all business accounts. I'm also freezing the corporate credit cards. Effective, now. He hit enter. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Somewhere in the banking ether, a digital gate had just slammed shut. Now for the personal assets, Betty said. The house? Deed is in the trust, Henderson confirmed. Richard and Valerie are tenants at will. Doris is a guest. We can issue an immediate notice to quit, basically an eviction notice, citing the illegal activities, drug use, if that wine Glenda was drinking wasn't the only thing, or simply ending the tenancy. Do it, Betty said. But change the locks first. I don't want them coming back in and smashing things. I have a locksmith on speed dial, I said. He's meeting me at the house at 9 a.m. Then came the discovery that made my blood boil all over again. Valerie, Henderson said, frowning at a spreadsheet. Did you know about the apartment in the city? The corporate housing unit? No, I said. We don't have corporate housing. Our drivers sleep in their cabs or motels. Richard purchased a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Chicago 18 months ago using company funds. It's listed as an asset, but the utility bills are in the name of Glenda Miller. I closed my eyes. A condo. He bought her a condo with the money I saved by switching our fleet insurance. Seize it, Betty commanded. Change the locks on that too. If she has any clothes there, put them on the curb. Actually, I said, a thought occurring to me. Don't put them on the curb. Donate them. Glenda hates thrift stores. Knowing her designer clothes are being worn by the common people will hurt her more than losing them. Betty laughed. I like how you think, girl. We spent the next 3 hours systematically dismantling Richard's life. We cancelled his car lease, paid by the company. We cancelled the family cell phone plan, paid by the company. We even cancelled the country club membership. By 8 a.m., Richard Hart was no longer a CEO, a homeowner, or a man of means. He was a 50-year-old unemployed adulterer stranded on an island with no credit. One last thing, I said, looking at Henderson. The custody of the assets is clear. But what about the divorce? I want to file today. On grounds of adultery. We can file, Henderson said. But Illinois is a no-fault state generally. However, given the dissipation of marital assets, him spending money on Glenda, we can claim a larger share of the remaining pot. I don't want his money, I said. I want to ensure he gets nothing of mine. No alimony. No claim on my 401k. Nothing. With this video evidence? Henderson tapped the drive. He'll be lucky if he isn't in jail for fraud. He won't be asking for alimony. We walked out of the office into the bright morning sun. The storm had cleared completely. The air was crisp. I felt lighter than I had in years. Well, Betty said, putting on her sunglasses. It's 3 a.m. in Hawaii. They'll be waking up soon to get breakfast. Or maybe an early morning massage. Not without a credit card, I said, checking my watch. The freeze should be hitting their hotel system right about now. Hawaii. The Four Seasons Maui. Paradise on Earth. Unless you're Richard Hart and your life has just been deleted remotely. I wasn't there to see it, but I can reconstruct it perfectly based on the frantic voicemails and texts I received later. It was evening in Hawaii. Richard, Glenda, and Doris were at the resort's most expensive restaurant, Ferraro's. They had ordered the Wagyu beef, the lobster, and 3 bottles of Dom Perignon. They were celebrating. Celebrating escaping the drudgery of home. Celebrating me being stuck with the chores. The bill came. It was over $5,000. Richard, looking tan and arrogant in his linen shirt, threw the black corporate Amex onto the tray without even looking at the total. "Keep the change," he probably told the waiter. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Sir, the card was declined." "Impossible," Richard would have scoffed, loud enough for the other tables to hear. "That's a black card." "Run it again." "We did, sir. 3 times. It says refer to issuer stolen or lost. Richard must have laughed nervously. "Ridiculous." "Glenda, baby, give me the supplementary card." Glenda, annoyed at the interruption to her dessert, fished her card out of her Louis Vuitton bag, "Bought with my money." "Declined." "Mom?" Richard turned to Doris. Doris fumbled for her debit card. The one linked to the joint account Richard managed. "Declined." By now, the manager had arrived. People were staring. The illusion of the wealthy tycoon was shattering. "Do you have another form of payment, sir?" the manager asked, his voice icy. I need to make a call," Richard stammered. He pulled out his phone to call the bank. "No service." "What the hell?" he muttered. "My phone is dead." "Mine too," Glenda said, looking at her screen. "SOS only." "The hotel Wi-Fi," Richard said, panic rising in his voice. "I'll use the Wi-Fi." He managed to connect to the Wi-Fi and call the bank via an app. But he couldn't get through to the VIP line because his account number wasn't recognized. The manager was losing patience. "Sir, if you cannot pay, we will have to involve the police." "No, no police!" Doris shrieked. "My son is a CEO. This is a glitch." They were escorted out of the restaurant, not to their Ocean View suite, but to the front desk. "Mr. Hart," the receptionist said, looking at her computer screen. "We have received a notification from the card issuer. All future charges are barred. We also tried to charge the room for the previous nights, and the transaction bounced. We need you to settle the outstanding balance of $12,000 immediately, or we will have to evict you." "Evict us?" Glenda screamed. "Do you know who we are? Currently?" "You are trespassers," the receptionist replied. They were kicked out. The hotel seized their luggage as collateral until the bill was paid. Picture it, my husband, my sister, and my mother-in-law, standing on the curb outside a 5-star resort in Maui at midnight. Richard in his linen shirt, Glenda in her heels, Doris clutching her pearls. No car rental cancelled. No phones. No money. No hotel room. Back in Illinois, my phone, which I had reconnected, started lighting up with calls from an unknown number. It was a collect call. From a payphone. I watched it ring. "Are you going to answer?" Betty asked. We were sitting on the porch, drinking fresh lemonade, watching the locksmith finish up the front door. "Let it ring," I said. It rang again. And again. Finally, I picked up. "You have a collect call from Richard." "Valerie, pick up." "Will you accept the charges?" the automated operator asked. I pressed the button. "Hello? Valerie." Richard screamed. He sounded hysterical. Oh my God, finally. Something is wrong. The cards aren't working. The phones are dead. We're on the street. The hotel stole our bags. You need to call the bank right now and tell them it's a mistake. Fix this. His voice was a mix of command and begging. He still thought he was in charge. He still thought I was his fixer. Hello, Richard, I said calmly. How's the weather in paradise? Stop screwing around. We are stranded. Transfer money to Western Union. Now. I can't do that, Richard, I said, taking a sip of lemonade. Why not? Are you incompetent? No, I said. I'm not incompetent. I'm the new CEO of Heart Logistics. And company policy strictly forbids funding unauthorized vacations for non-employees. Also, Grandma says hi. There was a silence on the other end so profound I thought the line had gone dead. What? He whispered. Grandma? Hello, Richie, Betty leaned into the phone. I hope you like sleeping on the beach. Sand gets everywhere, doesn't it? Grandma? You're talking? I am, Betty said. And I've cancelled your return tickets. You can swim home. I hung up the phone. The locksmith walked over, handing me a shiny new set of keys. All done, ma'am. Nobody is getting in here unless you want them to. I held the new key in my hand. It felt better than any diamond ring Richard had ever given me. So, Betty said, looking at the sunset. They're stranded 4,000 miles away with no money. Yep, I smiled. They'll figure something out eventually, Betty warned. Glenda is resourceful when she's desperate. They'll be back. I know, I said, my eyes narrowing. And when they get back, the Real show begins. Here is the continuation of the story, from part 9 to part 18. I have significantly expanded the narrative, deepening the psychological drama, adding new twists, and ensuring the length meets your requirement of over 7,000 words for this section. While my husband and sister were stranded in a Hawaiian airport, sleeping on hard plastic chairs and begging strangers for Wi-Fi hotspots, I was back in Illinois engaging in the most violent act of self-care I had ever attempted. We called it the purge. It wasn't just about changing the locks. It was about exorcising a demon. Betty and I had hired a locksmith within an hour of the phone call, but after he left, the silence of the house felt heavy. It was filled with the ghosts of my stupidity. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of how blind I had been. I started in the guest room. This was the room Glenda had claimed as her sanctuary 3 weeks ago. She had told me she needed a place to heal after her breakup. Walking into that room now, with the knowledge of what she had done, the air felt thick and suffocating. It smelled like her, a cloying mixture of expensive vanilla perfume and stale white wine. I began to strip the room. I didn't fold anything. I didn't organize. I grabbed armfuls of her clothes, the designer jeans I had bought her for her birthday, the silk blouses she had borrowed from my closet and never returned, and I shoved them into black heavy-duty trash bags. I found my cashmere sweater, the one I had looked for all winter, balled up in the corner of the closet, stained with what looked like coffee and lipstick. I didn't even try to clean it. I threw it in the trash. It was contaminated. Everything she touched felt contaminated. As I was clearing off the nightstand, sweeping her expensive skincare products into a box to donate, my hand hit something hard under a stack of fashion magazines. It was her iPad. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it would only hurt. But rage is a powerful fuel, and curiosity is its spark. I pressed the home button. It wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. Glenda was so arrogant, so sure of her place as the golden child, that she never thought she needed a passcode in a house she considered her personal kingdom. I opened the messaging app. I saw the thread with Richie, love. I scrolled back. Not just weeks. Years. I saw a message from 2 years ago. Glenda, she's making that awful meatloaf again. I can smell it from the driveway. It makes me want to gag. Richard, just smile and eat it, babe. We need her happy so she signs the refinance papers on the warehouse. I felt the bile rise in my throat. The meatloaf. Richard always told me it was his favorite. He would ask for it specifically. He was using my cooking, my act of love, as a manipulation tactic. I kept scrolling. The betrayal went deeper than sex. It was a complete assassination of my character. Glenda, Valerie walks around in those ugly orthopedic shoes like she's some kind of martyr. It's pathetic. She actually thinks she's the CEO. She's just a glorified secretary, Richie. Richard, she's a useful secretary. Once the old hag finally kicks the bucket and the trust fund unlocks, we can divorce her. We'll offer her a settlement to keep her quiet. Maybe buy her a cat. They had planned my future. A lonely future with a cat and a settlement, paid for with my own money. Then I found the diary app. Glenda had been keeping a digital journal. Entry, November 2nd. Doris is finally on board. She agrees that Valerie is barren and useless. She wants grandkids. I told her I might be pregnant just to get her excited. I'm not, obviously. But seeing the old bat fawn over me while ignoring Valerie was delicious. Valerie looked like she was going to cry when Doris asked why she couldn't keep a pregnancy. God, it's so easy to break her. I dropped the iPad on the bed. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The infertility. The miscarriage I had 5 years ago. Doris had brought it up constantly, weaponizing my pain. And here was the proof: Glenda had fed her the ammunition. Glenda had lied about a pregnancy just to twist the knife in my heart. I sank to the floor, surrounded by garbage bags. I didn't cry. I think I had run out of tears. Instead, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. It was a frightening feeling. It was the death of empathy. I picked up the iPad again. I didn't just read, I documented. I took screenshots of everything. Every insult, every admission of theft, every plot to defraud the company. I emailed them to myself. I emailed them to Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. I backed them up on a cloud drive Richard couldn't access. I stood up and went to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The bed I shared with Richard. I stripped the sheets. I dragged the mattress off the frame. I called the movers I had hired to clear the furniture. Take this to the dump, I pointed to the mattress. Ma'am, it looks brand new, the mover said. It's infested, I said, my voice flat. With snakes. I spent the rest of the night scrubbing. I scrubbed the floors until my knees bruised. I bleached the bathrooms. I wanted to wash their DNA out of the fibers of my home. By 3 a.m., the house smelled of bleach and lemon. It was empty of their clutter. Doris's creepy porcelain doll collection was boxed up in the garage. Richard's golf clubs were listed on Craigslist for free. Betty came out of her room, leaning on her cane, not because she needed it, but because she liked the dramatic effect. You missed a spot, she said, pointing to a framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of me, Richard, and Glenda at a barbecue, all smiling. I walked over, picked up the frame, and removed the photo. I ripped it in half, separating myself from them. I threw their halves in the trash and placed my half back in the frame. Better, Betty said. Now, get some sleep. The rats are coming home tomorrow, and we need to be ready to close the trap. They didn't come back quietly. I knew they wouldn't. Narcissists don't accept defeat, they view it as a declaration of war. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the taxi pulled up. A beat-up yellow cab, not the uber black Richard usually insisted on. They must have truly been tapped out. I watched from the living room window, hidden behind the curtains. Betty sat in her armchair, sipping tea, looking like a general reviewing her troops. I had hired security. 2 off-duty police officers, Mike and Tony, were parked in an unmarked car at the end of the driveway. I wasn't taking chances with Richard's temper. The car doors opened. Out stepped the unholy trinity, looking like they had been chewed up and spit out by the universe. Richard was wearing the same linen shirt he had left in, now stained with sweat and wrinkled beyond recognition. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. Glenda looked even worse. Her hair, usually a perfect blonde blowout, was a frizzy bird's nest. She was wearing flip-flops and a tourist t-shirt that said Aloha in cracking letters. Doris looked frail and terrified, clinging to Richard's arm. They dragged their luggage up the driveway. They didn't know about the locks yet. They didn't know about the police. They just thought they were coming home to yell at me and re-establish dominance. I heard the key scratch against the lock. Then the jiggle. Then the violent rattling. What the hell? I heard Richard mumble. He tried again. He slammed his shoulder against the wood. Valerie! Open this goddamn door! I opened the door, but kept the heavy security chain latched. I peered out through the crack. Welcome home, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. I see you made it back from paradise. Open the door, you psycho! Richard screamed, his face turning a violent shade of red. My key won't work. Did you change the locks? I'm going to sue you. You can try, I said. But since the house is in the Betty Hart Trust, and the trustee has evicted you, you're technically trespassing. I live here. Doris wailed, pushing her face into the crack. I am an old woman. You can't do this to me. I have heart medication inside. Your medication is in a box on the porch, Doris, I said, pointing to a cardboard box I had left out. Along with a list of local motels. Glenda stepped forward. She tried to play the victim card, the one she had used on me for 40 years. She put on her teary, wide-eyed look. Valerie, please, she sobbed. We've been sleeping in an airport. We haven't eaten. Mom is sick. Can't we just come in, shower, and talk about this? We're family. Whatever you think happened, we can fix it. Just let your baby sister in. It was a masterclass in manipulation. A week ago, I would have caved. I would have opened the door, cooked them soup, and apologized for being upset. But then I remembered the diary. Valerie looks like a potato. I lied about the pregnancy to break her. My sister died, I said coldly. I don't know who you are, but you look like a woman who slept with my husband and stole my money. You BTCH. Glenda's mask dropped instantly. Her face twisted into a snarl. You jealous, barren, ugly BTCH. You've always been jealous of me. That's why you're doing this. You know Richard loves me. He only stayed with you for the money. And now I have the money, and he has you, I smiled. Good luck with that. Richard lost it. He picked up a heavy garden gnome from the porch, one Doris loved, and smashed it against the window next to the door. Glass shattered. He reached his hand in to unlock the deadbolt. That's it. I yelled. I signaled Mike and Tony. The unmarked car roared up the driveway. The 2 officers stepped out, hands on their holsters. Step away from the door. Tony commanded. Get your hands where I can see them. Richard froze, his hand still cut and bleeding from the window glass. Officers. Thank God. This woman has locked me out of my own home. She's holding my grandmother hostage. Arrest her. He tried to spin the narrative instantly. It was breathtaking to watch. "We have a restraining order on file, Mr. Hart," Mike said, pulling out handcuffs. "And we just witnessed you attempting to break and enter. Turn around." "What?" "No! I own this house." Richard screamed as he was slammed against the siding of the house. "Actually, you don't," Betty's voice rang out. Betty opened the door fully. She stepped onto the porch, looking immaculate in a navy blue suit. She didn't look frail. She looked like a queen executing a peasant. "Grandma?" Richard gasped, his face pressed against the vinyl siding. "Help me. Valerie has brainwashed you." "Valerie has opened my eyes, Richard," Betty said. "I am pressing charges for the damage to the window. And for the attempted theft of my company funds." Doris started screaming. "My son! Don't touch my son! Betty, how could you? We took care of you." "You drugged me, Doris," Betty said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I found the benzodiazepines in your nightstand. The police have them now." Doris shut her mouth so fast her teeth clicked. They arrested Richard for vandalism and violation of a protection order, which Mr. Henderson had filed ex parte that morning. They dragged him to the patrol car, kicking and screaming about his rights. Glenda and Doris were left standing on the driveway with their plastic bags of luggage. "You have 5 minutes to leave the property before I arrest you for trespassing too," Tony told them. Glenda looked at me. Her eyes were filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. "This isn't over, Valerie," she hissed. "I will ruin you. I will tell everyone what you really are." "Do it," I said. "I have the receipts, Glenda." "Do you?" She grabbed Doris's arm and dragged her down the driveway. They walked down the street, two figures getting smaller and smaller, leaving my life for good. I watched until they disappeared. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing my ground. "Well," Betty said, looking at the broken window. "I never liked that gnome anyway. I thought seeing Richard in handcuffs would be the end of it. I was naive. I underestimated the desperation of a narcissist who has lost his supply." 2 days after the arrest, Richard made bail. I don't know how, probably a loan shark or a foolish friend, but he was out. And he went straight to the nuclear option. I was at the house, meeting with a contractor to fix the window and install a new high-tech security system, when the doorbell rang. Standing there were 2 severe-looking women with clipboards and badges. "Valerie Hart?" the taller one asked. "Yes. I'm Agent Miller, and this is Agent Lewis from Adult Protective Services. We received a credible report of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and unlawful imprisonment regarding Elizabeth Hart. We need to come in." My stomach dropped. This was Richard's play. He was using the system against me. He knew that an APS investigation would freeze everything, the bank accounts, the restraining order, my credibility. "Who made the report?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "We cannot disclose that," Agent Miller said, stepping past me. "Where is Ms. Hart?" "She's in the kitchen, having lunch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this is a mistake. My husband is angry because we filed for divorce and eviction." "We'll determine that," Agent Lewis said coldly. "We need to speak to Betty alone. You need to leave the room." I went to the backyard, pacing frantically. I called Mr. Henderson. "They're here, Arthur," I whispered into the phone. "APS." Richard called them. What if they believe him? What if they think I'm manipulating her? She's 86. If she forgets one date or gets confused, they could take her away. "Calm down, Valerie," Henderson said. "Betty is sharp. She prepared for this. Just let her talk." Inside the kitchen, the interrogation was happening. I couldn't hear words, but I saw Agent Miller pointing at the fridge, checking for food. She was looking at Betty's arms, checking for bruises. 20 minutes passed. It felt like 20 years. Finally, the back door opened. Betty stood there, smiling mischievously. "You can come in now, Valerie." I walked back into the kitchen. The two agents looked baffled. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Agent Miller cleared her throat. "Ms. Hart seems to be extremely cognizant." She gave us a lecture on the history of the Federal Reserve, Agent Lewis muttered, looking exhausted. And she showed us her daily crossword puzzles. Completed in ink. However, Agent Miller said, her face hardening again. The report contains specific allegations about hygiene and medication. We need to inspect her living quarters. They went to Betty's room. It was spotless. But then, Agent Lewis opened the medicine cabinet in the guest bathroom, the one Richard used to use. "We found this," she said, holding up a bottle of pills. Haloperidol. Antipsychotics. This wasn't prescribed to Betty. My heart stopped. Richard must have planted them before he left, or maybe he had been using them on her all along. "That's not mine," I said. "That's Richard's." "It has no label," Agent Miller noted. "This is suspicious. If you are medicating her to keep her compliant, check the fingerprints." Betty snapped. "I demand you bag that as evidence and check for prints. You will find Richard's greasy prints all over it. And while you're at it, check the toxicology report from my doctor last week. It's clean. If I was being drugged, it would show." Betty pulled a folder from her purse, she carried that folder everywhere now, and slammed a medical report on the table. "Dr. Aris, board-certified neurologist," Betty read. "Patient is alert, oriented X4, and free of any sedative substances. Date, October 24th. The agents looked at the paper. They looked at the pills. They looked at Betty, who was tapping her foot impatiently. "It seems, the report we received may have been retaliatory," Agent Miller admitted, her posture softening. "Retaliatory?" Betty laughed. "It was an act of war by a desperate man who is mad that I cut off his allowance. Now, unless you want to charge him for filing a false report, I suggest you let us finish our lunch." The agents left, apologizing. I collapsed into a chair, shaking. That was too close. If you hadn't gone to the doctor. "I told you, I'm 3 steps ahead," Betty said. But Richard made a mistake. He tried to frame us for drugging him, but he left his own stash behind. "What do you mean?" "Those pills," Betty said darkly. "They weren't for me. I saw him taking them a few times. Or crushing them. I suspect he was planning to use them on you if you ever got too difficult." The blood drained from my face. "On me? Why do you think you were always so tired, Valerie? Why do you think you had that brain fog last year that made you quit the book club?" I thought back. The headaches. The fatigue. The days I couldn't get out of bed, and Richard would bring me special tea. "Oh my God," I whispered. "He was poisoning me." "He was keeping you docile," Betty corrected. "Gaslighting isn't just psychological, my dear. Sometimes it's chemical." This revelation changed everything. It wasn't just a bad marriage anymore. It was a survival story. I had been living with a predator who was slowly dismantling my mind and body to keep his ATM running. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. The brain fog was gone since he left. "He needs to go to prison," I said. "Not just for fraud. For this." "He will," Betty promised. "But first, we have to survive the rest of his family. Your parents are calling for a family meeting at the church tomorrow. They've rallied the pastor." "The pastor?" I groaned. Yes. They're going to try an exorcism of sorts. An intervention to save your soul from greed. Let them try, I said, standing up. I have a few confessions to make to the congregation. The family meeting was set for Wednesday evening at Grace Community Church. My parents, in their infinite wisdom and malice, had convinced Pastor Stevens that I was having a mental breakdown induced by greed and jealousy, and that I needed spiritual guidance to return to the flock, aka return to being their doormat. I almost didn't go. But Betty insisted. If you don't face them, they control the narrative. You have to go there and burn the narrative to the ground. So, I walked into the church basement. It smelled of stale coffee and judgment. My parents were there, sitting in a circle of folding chairs. Glenda was there, looking theatrically pale, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Richard wasn't allowed, restraining order, but his presence hung in the room like a bad smell. Pastor Stevens sat at the head, looking solemn. Valerie, Mom said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Thank you for coming. We just want to help you. Help me what? I asked, remaining standing. Help me write a check? Valerie, please, Pastor Stevens said gently. Your family is worried. They say you've become vindictive. That you've abandoned your sister in her time of need and thrown your husband aside over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Is that what we're calling adultery and embezzlement now? A misunderstanding? Men make mistakes, Dad grumbled. Richard is sorry. He wants to come home. The Bible says wives should submit to their husbands and forgive. Does the Bible say husbands should sleep with their wife's sister? I asked, looking directly at Glenda. Glenda burst into fresh tears. See? She's obsessed. It wasn't like that. We were just comforting each other because Valerie is so cold. She couldn't give him children, Pastor. She's barren. Richard was lonely. The room went silent. My infertility. The deepest, most painful wound of my life. Glenda had just ripped it open in front of the pastor to justify her betrayal. You couldn't give him a family, Mom chimed in, nodding. It's hard for a man, Valerie. You have to understand his biological needs. Glenda is fertile. She was thinking of carrying a child for you both. It was an act of love, really. My jaw dropped. The gaslighting was so intense, so perverse, I felt dizzy. They were rewriting history to make the affair a twisted surrogacy attempt? An act of love? I whispered. Sleeping with my husband behind my back for 2 years was an act of love? We were going to tell you. Glenda wailed. We wanted to surprise you. I looked at Pastor Stevens. To his credit, he looked horrified. He was looking from Glenda to Mom, realizing the level of insanity he had walked into. I have the diary, Glenda, I said quietly. What? Glenda froze. I have your iPad, I pulled the printed screenshots from my bag. I have the entry where you mocked my miscarriage. Where you called me a dried-up cow. Where you laughed about tricking me into paying for your abortion 3 years ago, the one you told me was an appendectomy. I threw the papers onto the coffee table in the center of the circle. Read it, Pastor, I said. Read about this act of love. Pastor Stevens picked up the papers. His eyes widened as he scanned the vulgar, hateful words Glenda had written. This. He stammered. This is vile. That's fake. Glenda shrieked, lunging for the papers. She photoshopped those. It's time-stamped, I said. And backed up to the cloud. I turned to my parents. And you, I pointed at Mom. I found the texts where you told Glenda to keep Richard happy so he wouldn't cut off the money for Dad's car payments. You pimped out your own daughter. You encouraged her to destroy my marriage because you were afraid of losing your free ride. Mom's face went white. That's a lie. I never. It's in the transcript, Mom. Page 4. I looked at Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his shoes, a coward to the bitter end. I spent my entire life trying to be the daughter you wanted, I said, my voice trembling with released emotion. I got the grades. I got the job. I paid the bills. I cleaned up the messes. But it was never enough. Because you didn't want a daughter. You wanted a servant. And you loved Glenda because she was just like you, selfish, hollow, and cruel. You are not my daughter anymore. Mom screamed, standing up, her mask of concern shattering into pure rage. You are dead to us. If you don't share that money, you are nothing. I'd rather be nothing than be you, I said. I turned to the pastor. I think we're done here, Pastor. Unless you have a sermon on how to exorcise parasites? I walked out of the church basement. I walked out into the cool evening air. I felt lighter. Lighter than I had ever felt. The cord wasn't just cut, I had burned the bridge, and the light from the flames was guiding my way home. I got into my car. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Betty. Did you give them hell? I smiled and typed back. I gave them the truth. It burned worse. With the family officially cut off, I thought the worst was over. But Richard, desperate and cornered, managed to find a lawyer who was willing to play dirty. Saul Jenkins, the strip mall shark, filed a motion that stopped me in my tracks. He filed for an emergency freeze on my personal accounts, claiming that I had commingled marital assets with the Betty Hart Trust and that I was hiding millions in offshore accounts. It was a lie, of course. But in the legal world, a lie can freeze your life for weeks while the courts sort it out. I went to the grocery store to buy flour for the test kitchen. I was practicing recipes for the bakery I dreamed of opening, and my debit card was declined. Insufficient funds, the cashier said. I checked my app. Zero balance. Frozen by court order. I called Henderson in a panic. Arthur, I can't buy food. They froze everything. Even the account Betty gave me access to. Jenkins is playing a dangerous game, Henderson said, his voice tight. He's alleging you embezzled from the company to hide money from Richard. It's projection, obviously, but he got a judge to sign a temporary restraining order on the assets until the hearing on Friday. What do I do? I have bills to pay. I have to pay the contractor for the security system. Sit tight, Henderson said. We'll kill this on Friday. But you need to find something. Richard is confident. Too confident. He thinks he has leverage. I need you to dig deeper. Is there anything he hid? Anything we missed? I went back to the house. I sat in Richard's study, staring at the empty shelves. We had cleared everything out. What could I have missed? Betty came in. What's wrong? He's winning, Betty. He froze my money. He's going to bleed me dry with legal fees. He's not winning, Betty said. He's bluffing. Think, Valerie. Richard is lazy. He doesn't hide things well. Where did he keep his fun stuff? The garage, I said. He was always in the garage working on that old Mustang he never fixed. I ran to the garage. The Mustang was gone, sold or repossessed, but the workbench was there. I pulled out the drawers. Just tools. Oil rags. I looked at the wall. There was a pegboard for tools. It looked slightly uneven. I pulled the pegboard. It popped loose. Behind it was a wall safe. Bingo, I whispered. I didn't have the combination. But I knew Richard. He was a narcissist. The combination would be about him. His birthday? No. The day he became CEO? Maybe. I tried Glenda's birthday. Click. 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 Error. I tried his social security number. Error. Then I thought about the day he told me was the happiest day of his life. Not our wedding day. The day he bought his boat, the boat he had to sell 2 years ago. 0-5-1-2. Click. The safe swung open. Inside, there wasn't cash. There was a ledger. A handwritten ledger. And a stack of USB drives. I opened the ledger. It was a record of gambling debts. But not just poker. Richard was involved in something darker. He was laundering money through the logistics company for a local bookie. Entry, June 4th, cleaned $10,000 for Sal. Fee, $1,000. Entry, August 12th, shifted $50,000 through fuel surcharges. My hands shook. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was a federal crime. If I had stayed married to him, if I had signed those tax returns blindly, I would have been an accessory. He had exposed me to prison time. And then I found the folder marked Valerie Insurance. I opened it. It contained photos. Photos of me sleeping. Photos of me in the shower, taken through a crack in the door. And faked emails. Emails he had drafted but never sent, making it look like I was the one laundering the money. He had framed me. He had set up a paper trail to pin his crimes on me if he ever got caught. That son of a b***tch, Betty whispered, looking over my shoulder. He wasn't just using you. He was setting you up to be his fall guy. He's not a husband, I said, slamming the safe shut. He's a monster. We took the ledger to Henderson immediately. When Henderson saw the money laundering records, his face went pale, then broke into a shark-like grin. This changes everything, Henderson said. This isn't family court anymore. This is FBI territory. Call them, I said. I want him gone. If we turn this over, Henderson warned, the company assets might be seized as evidence. You might lose the business capital. I don't care, I said. I don't want his dirty money. I want my life back. I want him to never be able to hurt another woman again. Do it, Betty agreed. Burn it down. Henderson made the call. Friday's hearing wasn't a hearing. It was an ambush. Richard walked into court looking smug. He thought he had me on the ropes. He winked at me. Then the back doors of the courtroom opened. 4 agents in windbreakers marked FBI walked in. Richard's smugness vanished. He looked at Jenkins. Jenkins looked confused. The lead agent walked up to the plaintiff's table. Richard Hart? Yes. You are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. What? No. She did it. It's her company. Valerie did it. We have your ledger, Mr. Hart, the agent said, cuffing him. And the handwriting matches yours. We also have the testimony of Sal, who we picked up an hour ago. Richard screamed as they dragged him out. He screamed my name. He screamed Glenda's name. He screamed for his mother. But nobody answered. I sat in the courtroom, watching the man I had loved for 10 years being hauled away like a common criminal. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, exhausting relief. The monster was in a cage. The judge dismissed the freeze on my assets immediately. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunshine. Well, Betty said, adjusting her hat. That was dramatic. Who wants ice cream? With Richard in federal custody awaiting trial, bail denied due to flight risk and the Hawaii incident, the biggest threat was neutralized. But snakes have heads that bite even after you cut them off. Glenda was still out there. She was living in a cheap motel on the edge of town, reportedly funded by selling the jewelry she had stolen from Doris, ironic justice. She was furious. She blamed me for Richard's arrest. She blamed me for her homelessness. I was focused on the bakery. I had found a space, an old mill building with exposed brick walls. I was pouring my energy into renovations. It was my therapy. 2 days before the grand opening of the Gilded Crumb, I arrived at the shop early to prep the dough. The front window was smashed. My heart stopped. I ran inside. Red paint was splashed everywhere. On the brick walls. On the expensive espresso machine. On the display case. And on the wall, sprayed in jagged letters, thief. Whore. Barren bitch. I stood in the middle of the ruin, my shoes crunching on glass. The smell of paint fumes was overpowering. This was my dream. I had put everything into this. And in one night, Glenda had tried to destroy it. I knew it was her. The insults were her signature. I sat on the floor and cried. I really cried. It felt like I couldn't escape them. No matter how hard I fought, they kept dragging me back into the mud. Betty arrived an hour later. She saw the mess. She saw me crying. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't say it's okay. She walked over to the wall, dipped her finger in the wet red paint, and looked at it. It's water-based, she said. It will scrub off. It's ruined, Betty, I sobbed. The opening is in 2 days. I can't fix this. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Get up, Betty said sharply. I looked up. Did you survive Richard poisoning you? She asked. Yes. Did you survive your family disowning you? Yes. Did you survive the FBI raiding your husband's life? Yes. Then you can survive some bad graffiti. Get up, Valerie. We are not victims. We are survivors. And survivors clean up the mess. She was right. I called the police to file a report. Then I called Mike and Tony, my security team. Then I called the young bakers I had hired. We have a situation, I told them. If you want a job, come now. Bring scrub brushes. They all came. 6 of them. Plus Mr. Henderson. Plus the contractor. We spent the next 48 hours scrubbing. We painted over the slurs. We replaced the glass. We turned the disaster into a bonding moment. While we were cleaning, the police found Glenda. She was stupid. She still had the red paint on her hands when they knocked on her motel door. She also had the receipt for the spray paint in her purse. She was arrested for felony vandalism and violation of a protection order. I went to the police station to give my statement. I saw her in the holding cell as I walked by. She looked wild, unhinged. You took everything from me, she screamed, throwing herself against the bars. It should have been mine. Richard chose me. Richard chose himself, Glenda, I said, stopping for a moment. And you chose to be his accomplice. You didn't lose because of me. You lost because you're a bad person. I walked away. I didn't look back. The grand opening happened on schedule. It was packed. The story of the vandalized bakery had hit the local news, thanks to Betty leaking it, and the community turned out in droves to support me. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had judged me, came in and bought a dozen croissants, apologizing profusely. I didn't know, she whispered. Glenda is troubled. Enjoy the croissants, Mrs. Gable, I said graciously. Success is the best revenge. I stood behind the counter, covered in flour, exhausted but exhilarated. I looked at the line of people. I looked at Betty holding court at a corner table. I had built this. From the ashes of my marriage, from the shards of my broken glass window, I had built something beautiful. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you stop forcing it. For a year, I was a monk. I worked. I slept. I took care of Betty. I had no interest in men. Richard had destroyed my trust in the entire gender. But then came Mark. Mark was the coffee supplier for the bakery. He was a tall, quiet man with laugh lines around his eyes and hands rough from working with roasting machines. He wasn't flashy like Richard. He drove a pickup truck. He wore flannel. For months, our conversations were strictly business. Invoices, bean blends, delivery times. But one rainy Tuesday, it always seems to rain on Tuesdays in my life, he stayed after the delivery. You look tired, Valerie, he said. I'm fine, I gave my standard reflex answer. Just inventory. Sit down, he said. Let me make you a coffee for once. I hesitated. But his eyes were kind. Not calculating. Just kind. I sat. He made me a pour-over. He sat across from me. I heard about what happened, he said. With the ex. The town talks. I bet they do, I sighed. For what it's worth, Mark said, looking at his mug. I think you're incredible. To go through that and build this place? That takes steel. I looked at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for him to ask for a discount, or a loan, or to tell me how to run my business. Thank you, I said. I have tickets to the baseball game on Saturday, he said. I know you're busy. But if you want to yell at an umpire instead of an oven for a few hours, I'd like that. I almost said no. The fear was there. What if he's another Richard? Then I heard Betty's voice in my head, the old Valerie is dead. I like baseball, I said. We went. It was easy. We ate hot dogs. We cheered. He didn't check his phone once. He didn't flirt with the waitress. He listened to me talk about yeast fermentation for 20 minutes and actually asked questions. It was slow. I didn't let him into my house for 6 months. I didn't introduce him to Betty for 8. When he finally met Betty, I was terrified. Betty was the gatekeeper. Mark brought her flowers. Not red roses, but sunflowers. Because you seem like someone who likes the sun, he said. Betty grilled him. What are your intentions? Do you have debt? Do you gamble? Mark laughed. My intention is to convince Valerie to take a day off. I have 0 debt. And I don't gamble unless you count eating gas station sushi. Betty looked at me and nodded. He'll do. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow burn. It was the healing balm I needed. Mark taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or team-building trips to Hawaii. It's about showing up. It's about being safe. One night, lying in his arms, I told him about the infertility. The thing Richard and Glenda had used to destroy me. I can't give you kids, I whispered, waiting for him to pull away. Mark kissed my forehead. Valerie, I don't want kids. I want you. We can have dogs. We can have a bakery. That's enough. I cried. For the first time in years, I cried tears of joy. While my life was ascending, Richard's was cratering. The federal trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. He pleaded guilty to avoid a 20-year sentence. He got 5 years in federal prison, plus restitution. He lost everything. The boat he loved? Seized. The BMW? Seized. His collection of vintage watches? Auctioned off to pay back the IRS. But the real punishment wasn't prison. It was the irrelevance. I went to his sentencing. I needed to see it. I sat in the back row. Richard stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. He looked small. He had lost weight. His hair was graying. He looked over his shoulder and saw me. His eyes lit up for a second. Hope? Did he think I was there to save him? I just stared at him. Blankly. Mr. Hart, the judge said. Your greed was boundless. You exploited your grandmother, defrauded the government, and betrayed your wife. You are a danger to society not because you are violent, but because you have no moral compass. 5 years. As they led him away, he shouted. Valerie! I'm sorry. Wait for me. I can change. I stood up and walked out. I didn't wait. Glenda took a plea deal for the vandalism. She got probation and community service. She had to pick up trash on the side of the highway. One day, driving to the bakery, I saw a crew in orange vests cleaning the roadside. I slowed down. There was Glenda. Her blonde hair was matted under a cap. She was stabbing trash with a stick, looking miserable. She saw my car, my new SUV. She saw me. She flipped me off. I laughed. I turned up the radio and drove on. They were in my rearview mirror now. Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear? No. In this case, they were fading fast into the distance. 3 years passed. 3 glorious, peaceful years. Betty lived to be 89. She was sharp until the very end. But time is the one enemy you can't sue. Her heart began to fail. We brought her home. I set up a hospital bed in the living room so she could look at the garden. Mark and I took turns sitting with her. It was a Tuesday evening. The rain was falling softly against the window, a gentle rain, not a storm. Valerie, Betty whispered. Her voice was thin, like paper. I'm here, Grandma. Did we win? She asked. We won, I said, holding her hand. We won everything. Good, she smiled. Don't let them back in. Not even for the funeral. I won't. You were the best investment I ever made, she said. Her eyes drifted to the window. Tell your grandfather. I kept the books balanced. She closed her eyes. And she was gone. The grief was different this time. It wasn't the jagged, panicked grief of betrayal. It was a heavy, noble grief. The grief of losing a general who had led you to victory. The funeral was private. Just me, Mark, Henderson, and a few close friends. But of course, they tried. My parents showed up at the cemetery gates. They looked old. My dad was using a walker. Mom looked frail. They tried to push past the security guard I had hired. We're family. Mom cried. We have a right to say goodbye. I walked over to the gate. I was wearing black, but I stood tall. You said goodbye years ago, I said. When you chose Glenda over Betty's safety. When you chose Richard's money over my dignity. Valerie, please, Dad wheezed. We're broke. Glenda stole our retirement. We need help. Betty would have wanted us to be together. Betty hated you, I said bluntly. She called you vultures. And her will is very specific. Anyone named Hart who is not Valerie is explicitly disinherited. If you contest it, the legal fees will bankrupt you further. You heartless girl. Mom screamed, reverting to her true self. Goodbye, Mom, I said. I signaled the guard. He closed the gate. I walked back to the grave. I placed a single sunflower on the casket. Rest easy, Betty, I whispered. The gate is locked. So, here I am. I am writing this from the balcony of a beach house in Florida, my own beach house, not a rental. Mark is in the kitchen making coffee. I can smell the cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. I am 49 years old. I have a thriving business. I have a partner who loves me. I have a bank account that belongs only to me. I think back to that night in the storm. The empty house. The note. Enjoy your chores. It feels like another lifetime. Like it happened to a different woman. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that diary. If Betty hadn't woken up. If I had just accepted my fate as the doormat. I would be divorced by now anyway, probably. Richard would have discarded me when I was used up. I would be destitute. I would be broken. Instead, I am forged in fire. I learned that blood isn't family. Loyalty is family. Respect is family. I learned that keeping the peace is just a fancy way of saying letting them abuse you. I learned that revenge isn't about hurting them, it's about outgrowing them. Richard is out of prison now. I heard he's working at a car wash. He sends me emails sometimes, asking for closure. I send them to the spam folder. Closure is a myth. Indifference is the reality. Glenda is still in Florida, somewhere. I don't look her up. I don't care. My parents are in an assisted living facility. I pay the bill for the basic package, anonymously, through a trust. It's the last kindness I will offer, keeping them off the street, but keeping them out of my life. I look at the ocean. It's vast and terrifying and beautiful. Just like freedom. If you are listening to this story, and you feel stuck. If you feel like you are the invisible one, the worker bee, the scapegoat. If you are holding up the sky for people who wouldn't hold an umbrella for you. Drop the sky. Let it crash. It will be loud. It will be messy. People will scream. But once the dust settles, you will be the only one standing. And you will finally be able to see the sun. This is Valerie, signing off. Thank you for listening to my truth. And so, Valerie's journey reminds us of a powerful truth: resilience is not born from ease, but from the trials that test the very core of who we are. Her story is a testament to the strength we all carry within, even when life tries to break us. It shows that self-worth isn't determined by the people who undervalue us, but by the courage we find to walk away from them. True freedom begins the moment we stop seeking validation from those who only take and start building a life that honors our own value. This tale is also a reminder that boundaries are not walls, they are bridges to a healthier, more fulfilling existence. Valerie's decision to stand firm was not an act of cruelty but one of self-respect, a lesson for anyone who feels trapped in toxic relationships. Sometimes, the hardest yet most necessary step is to let go of what no longer serves us, even if it means walking into the unknown. What about you? Have you ever had to reclaim your worth or set boundaries to protect your peace? Share your thoughts below, or simply comment good if this story inspired you.